next we're going to think about furniture. Quite difficult for me to do in this sort of setting, so what I have brought along is a small tea caddy, and also something a little bit larger, which is a knife sharpener. Yay! And so we're going to have to think about these. So in the same way as with pretty much all of the other objects, ensure that you are wearing nitrile gloves to protect yourself and to protect the object. If it is something that is large and heavy, for example, like this, or like a large chair, sofa, beds, wardrobes, printing presses, we do have a lot of large heavy things in the collection. Ideally, it might get dismantled in order to be able to be moved more safely. And if there is anything like that that is on the priority object list, then any dismantling information will be provided on that. As far as I can recall, not much that is on our priority salvage list is really large, apart from some paintings, but there are a few things at Lauriston, for example, but say at the Museum of Childhood, mostly things are quite small because you want to take the low-hanging fruit first. If possible, if that works in terms of significance of objects. If you've got anything like a marble top table, for example, the top usually sits on top, and therefore that should be carried separately before the base of the frame of the table. And the marble or glass top, actually, in either case, should be carried vertically. So this is copper, not marble, but you lift it off like this, and then you want to carry it like that. Obviously more than one person, if it's marble or glass, it's going to be quite heavy, but that is so that if you were carrying it flat, because marble in particular has natural fissures in it, it's quite likely to buckle under its own weight and then break, whereas if you carry it like this, the weight is spread in a way that is safer for the structure of the stone. Also, in terms of dismantling, there are really simple things you can do, like taking drawers out, for example. So imagining that this caddy was a little bit bigger, you know, there is a removable part in here, this additional box, so that could be taken out and therefore makes it lighter to carry. But you also do need to make sure that they stay together in terms of information as well. So even if you have to take a drawer to, say, the dry salvage area, and the carcass of the cabinet is wet and has to go to the wet section, you need to make sure that they're associated with each other, so labeling the drawer, for example. Also, if the key doesn't work in, say, a cabinet, which I'm not sure this one does, very exciting watching person turning a key. Yes, it doesn't work. You might want to tie it shut, particularly useful with cabinets where the doors open outwards. The same would apply probably to dolls' houses, possibly certain kinds of games and things like that. Yeah, there'd be a variety of different things where you might need to use cotton tape. Where you might want to use cotton tape to tie an object shut. So if it opened outwards, then you would just go around and then tie it at the front. Obviously you wouldn't do it with a chest like this because of the way that the lid sits, but just tying it. To offer a little bit more security, and also, especially if doors are opening outwards, to make sure that they also don't swing open and hit you, or open when you're going through a doorway or something like that. So it's also for your own safety. You also want to lift by the lowest weight-bearing part of it. So, for example, with a table, you want to lift not from the top of the table, but from the legs. Same with chairs. You might need to lift sort of higher up, but higher up the legs, but you're not going to be lifting the top or lifting the seat. You want to lift from lower down. Same is true of this. You know, you're going to be lifting it from this part here, not from here. And that is because that is the bit that is designed to bear the weight, and therefore it's just safer that way for you. and for the object. Oh, I meant to say, if you're taking drawers out and there are contents in the drawers, and if the contents are fine, then you can just leave them in the drawers, that's fine. That's probably easier, it's less confusing. And I do know that at Lauriston there's a lot of content in the drawers, but if it's things like textiles that aren't going to move around, then they can just stay in there. If it's something that might move around, then just, as you would if you were packing them in a box, just add a bit more acid-free tissue paper in order to pack them out so that there isn't going to be movement and abrasion. Don't use any handles to lift things because handles are often weak. That'll come up probably again when we're talking about ceramics. You might want to use carrying straps for heavy things. Carrying straps are in the salvage kits, and we also have them at the art centre for the really large artworks. And if you are dealing with anything with fringing or upholstery, then that should be removed as well. That shouldn't be handled either. You should avoid that because fringing is likely to kind of come off if it's historic and under your fingers. Again, with upholstery, especially if it's got wet or damage in some way, then that can be a bit of a problem. So when you've got large objects, you need to make sure that you've got enough people to handle things. Carry in separate parts if you can, separate it. And also, again, as with the leather, furniture can be susceptible to mold growth because it's organic, and so that is another thing to consider. Is it something that you might need to freeze? If we do need to look at freezing large things, then that's when we'll be looking at hiring potentially a large walk-in freezer container, or using a freezer at another institution, or Harwell Document Recovery Services. They also have large freezers as well. So this would be in the event of like a larger scale thing. Obviously, if it's a fairly small scale one, we probably have room in our freezer for smaller things. But obviously, once we're talking about anything that sort of wouldn't fit in our chest freezer, then we're going to be looking at other solutions to deal with that. So you want to get the objects out first that are at highest risk, that are on the priority snatch list. Anything also with furniture that might be blocking the way out for getting other things out, other priority objects, so that can happen with large things. And so that might be something you need to move simply in order to clear safe routes to get things out. If you can't get them out, which could easily be the case in a situation where you've got, say, a very large wardrobe, then that should be put against the wall. Normally large furniture is against the wall anyway. Raised off the floor onto blocks if possible, if water is an issue, and protecting it in situ with polythene if water is a problem, or if it's fire, then one option is also to use wool underlay. Wool underlay is bad in the context of it's really attractive to insect pests, but it's good in the sense that it's a fire retardant. So yes, if we're, say, at Lauriston and we need to cover something, we do in fact have some wool drugget there that we could use to cover furniture if absolutely necessary. But again, that's kind of like a last resort sort of situation. Obviously, ideally we'd want to be getting things out to safety or to a place of safety within the same building. If the objects are wet, you want to detach remove any wet bits. For example, if there's a textile upholstery like a seat cover, then you might want to take that off and give it a rinse, then blot it and air dry in the same way as we did with the leather. Again, probably lying it on a tray is the best thing to do in order to support it, or possibly, depending on the weight, some thick acid-free card would be acceptable. And then, yes, as I say, blotting it and air drying it. If the drawers have been taken out, then you might want to actually put them back in, but take the contents out. This is only if the cabinet is sort of soaked, because you don't want the drawers and the carcass to respond to moisture in a different way, and therefore you can't get the drawer back in. So what you want to do is have the drawer pop it back in once you've got everything in a place of safety, but make sure the drawer is out a bit so that you can move it a bit, but it should then enable the carcass of the chest or the cabinet to dry in a way that will enable the drawer to actually move freely. But also by leaving the drawer open slightly, you've also got a circulation of air and hopefully less encouragement of mold growth. Then cupboard doors should be left open for the same reason, to allow it to air dry. You might need to prop those open with blocks or something like that. If something's got easily removable metal components, for example this, then you might want to take those off. These are just held on with screws, so there are some components that you would be able to remove fairly easily. But then others, for example, this handle, that you wouldn't be able to remove easily. Therefore, if you do have those metal components that you can't remove, like handles, for example, that you're not going to be able to get them off safely, then you want to make sure that they are basically protected in situ, make sure that they're dried off. If they are removed, they need to be bagged and clearly labelled once they've been dried through blotting with paper towels. And that's just to avoid a build-up of corrosion, whether copper or ferrous corrosion, because obviously we'll get onto metals a bit more in a bit, but yeah, metal doesn't necessarily respond that well to moisture. If you've got any dirty wooden components, then you want to rinse or sponge clean them and then blot them dry, and that can easily happen with either if something's got wet but it already had ingrained dirt on it, or again if there's been a fire and there's soot damage. And also water can become quite dirty if there's a lot of water being used by the fire services. And yes, you want to just ensure that that dirt isn't allowed to become totally ingrained to the point where it's staining the wood or the textile. So we talked a bit about the drawers just now. Same with everything really. Anything that is wood, particularly, you want to ensure that it is allowed to air dry slowly rather than quickly in order to avoid any warping or shrinkage. If you've got something like this with a veneer, you might be able to see here that the veneer has lifted slightly. So if that had happened as a result of an emergency where you had moisture coming in, then what you'd want to do is hold that veneer in place with a weight or a clamp, and you'd protect the surface with some tissue. So really just as simple as acid-free tissue paper, maybe a smaller bit than this. Just give me one moment. You can only find large bits of tissue. Typical. Nope. I could tear it up, I just didn't want to tear it up right now. So I've got some spider tissue here instead because it is less crinkly. So then that can be placed on top to protect the surface, and then a weight, so just a glass weight like this, will be placed on top. If it's a larger problem and you think it needs a bit more weight, then you can stack the weights up, and then you just allow that to dry slowly. Veneers can often lift up because they are very thin layers of wood, so those layers respond more quickly to moisture than, say, a chunky piece of wood like this, and also because they're usually secured with glue, there'll be more likelihood of delamination because the glue and the wood will respond in different ways and at different paces. But also you've got an added risk of mold growth there, because if it's an animal-based glue, which it probably is, then that's more susceptible to mold growth as well. So we want to try and make sure that we get the air out from behind the veneer and make it nice and flat. If you've got painted wooden objects or musical instruments, we wouldn't freeze those, as in sort of, highly painted decorative surfaces, not like, say, something that's fairly straightforward, like a say a fire cart would be just, you know, wood and painted red, something like that, you probably would be okay. But if it's like a very fine decorative surface, then you wouldn't want to freeze that necessarily, because it could cause issues with the different layers of paint. And obviously with musical instruments, they respond to heat and cold in very different ways, and they're much more fragile. So in that instance, we would definitely need to get advice from a musical instruments conservator.